So this is an idea I've had for a while. I'm not sure if it's going to work. It's going to be my first attempt. If it doesn't work great the first time, maybe I'll map it out a little bit better. So I've always been interested and intrigued by the ingenuity and the naivete and the ingenuity via and because of naivete of a teenager. So when I was 16 years old, this is like sometime in 1998, I was watching a movie one day, picked up a spiral notebook, and started writing a screenplay. I think I was watching a Halloween movie because the first line references Danielle Harris. It's just dialogue of two teenage kids talking. So in 1998, I started writing screenplays. The very first one was a movie called Squelch. I said, I don't know how well this is going to work. So, your normal affair, just a bunch of teenage kids talking teenage crap, talking about movies, running around, making out, doing dirty stuff, cussing a lot. No big thing, not important. Completely trash, completely junk. I thought it was great, of course. Then a couple years later, when I actually could write a little bit better, you look back at it and it's terrible. But like any writer, when you start to write, or any decent writer, and even these days, in 2025, so 27 years later, I don't even really consider myself a writer as much as a storyteller, obviously. You start crafting, no matter what you do, you start crafting your own world. If it's a fantasy story, sci-fi, whatever else. You're creating a world, you're crafting it, you're coming up with the characters, so you need backstories, you need connections. So at this point in time, I was really big into Kevin Smith movies, and most of his movies were connecting. All the Tarantino movies, they were all connecting. And nowadays, you obviously have the DC universe and the Marvel universe, and they all interconnect and whatever else and relate to each other. But it's been done long before Marvel. So Squelch was the first one I ever started writing. And then, of course, I wanted to leave it with sort of a cliffhanger. It kind of ends, but then some of the characters go on to another movie called And the Remnant Nint were slain. This being taken from a line in the Crow graphic novel. So Squelch and the Remnant were slain. But then I was like, well, since this character's from here, some of them obviously didn't make it, so the rest of them went on to this one. But then I was like, well, is there a story before this one? So then I started writing a story that was a prequel called Steel Tide on an Asphalt Beach, which also was taken from The Crow graphic novel. I always call it a graphic novel, although technically it's a trade paperback. It's a compilation of comics put together. So this is stolen from The Crow, this is stolen from The Crow, and most likely those two also were stolen or, homaged from other things. Because there's things like Atrocity Exhibition in The Crow, which is a reference to a Joy Division song, which is a reference to a J.G. Ballard story or a book. So there's layers and layers and layers. So I was stealing stuff from James O'Barr. James O'Barr was taking it from Ian Curtis. Ian Curtis was taking it from J.G. Ballard. So these are the first three movies. Steel Tide on Asphalt Beach, Squelch, and The Remnant Were Slain. So in this movie, has characters from this movie, has characters from this movie. Some make it all the way through, some die, some whatever else. In this one, there's an offshoot where one of the characters' older brothers is in a scene here talking about this trip he's going to make. He's driving out to California because he wants to be a filmmaker. Well, I know, original. But before he gets there, something happens and he ends up in his weird, creepy hotel, brilliantly titled Hotel California. So this one I wrote like the first 30 pages of, and most of the treatment of, and it's really big, long-ass monologue, and whatever. Never finished it. This one was finished, Squelch was finished, and The Remnant Were Slain was finished. Hotel California was never finished. Then I'm trying to think where it goes from there. So then there was this weird time where I was trying to do other offshoots of these. I was writing them, but then they never really felt connected, because there's another one that's sort of an offshoot of these. One was called Tony, Watch Your Head. It's Always Tuesday at My House. My handwriting is going to get significantly worse as this goes on. So this is a movie, Tony Watch Your Head, It's Always Tuesday at My House. And it's sort of correlated with the rest of these and sort of didn't correlate with the rest of these. Then there's a brilliant idea that even though this one happens at the same time as this one also has another side story going on where there's a movie called Rabbit in Red, for official use only. My handwriting is terrible. So this happens. This is the third one of this trilogy. And this happens at the same exact time. Well, technically it doesn't happen at the same exact time. A character from this one leaves and goes on to this one. So it doesn't technically happen at the same time. This one is just kind of an offshoot with a character, with a brother of a character who goes on to this. This one's never finished. Rabbit in Red happens the same exact time as this one. So while this character is going on here, you'll see somebody over here, and then they'll be in somebody's backyard on a trampoline or playing in the pool or something like that. Then back in the background between the houses, you'll see something else going on, and that's characters from this one. You know what I mean? Like in this one, they go into a gas station or convenience store and it gets robbed by a bunch of dudes in horror movie masks, and that's guys in this one doing that. So that's that. And somehow there's another offshoot of a movie called Whatever Happened to Charlie Bowles. Now, what I'm leaving out is Whatever Happened to Charlie Bowles is a reference to Halloween. Rabbit in Red for official use only is a reference to Halloween. Tony Watch Your Head, It's Always Tuesday at My House is a double reference. Tony Watch Your Head is a subtle reference to Reservoir Dogs. If you can figure that one out, comment below. It's Always Tuesday at My House is a phrase a friend of mine and I came up with in 7th grade. Never told a story behind what it means, but my first at yahoo.com email was It's Always Tuesday at My House, or It's Always Tuesday, or Always Tuesday 68. My first AIM messenger name was Always Tuesday or Always Tuesday 68. So this is my first real journal called the Tuesday Journals. The first one, year 20, is called It's Always Tuesday at My House. Year 21 was called Can't Wait Till Next Tuesday, which is a play off of It's Always Tuesday at My House because they correlate. Maybe one day I'll tell the story behind that. It's really childish, but also really funny. Because again, we came up with it in 6th grade, and it's just one of those inside jokes you have with your friends. Now, Whatever Happened to Charlie Bowles, I wrote a majority of, don't remember if I finished it, or I did a really quick, all the way through rough draft. Gave a copy of this to my friend Natalia, and I think this one too. I don't remember, but I never really saw this one again, and I don't remember Whatever Happened to that one either. So these two kind of don't exist anymore. I may still have handwritten pages somewhere, but I don't have any typed. Now these three, I think I still have. These three and this one I still have computer files for that I've touched up over the years and made look nice and presentable, and they're in like a collection of my abandoned screenplays, whatever. Because they're complete, but I'm never going to do anything with them, obviously. This one I think exists in some old printouts. These might exist in some old printouts, maybe pieces here and there, I'm not sure. So, I don't even know what you'd call this, but this was kind of like where we'd say Marvel Phase 1. Now, the interesting thing is, all of these, and there's, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, give or take, plus there's a couple short films and weird little stupid things I was writing. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7 movies, and all of these were done between 1998 and 1999. They're not great. So it kind of ends there, sort of. And then I stepped into writing this movie, originally called The Horror, which was sort of a reference to Apocalypse Now, the horror, whatever. So it was a horror movie about these kids that go out to a farmhouse in the middle of Kansas, in a town called Onega, based on a farmhouse that I used to go camping at when I was a kid. Eventually, as I wrote this screenplay, it turned into Apothecra, which is a word I made up. It's a conjunction of the word hypocrite with, I think what I thought at the time was apothecra, but it's really apocrypha, the apocryphal text, whatever the term apocryphal. It's just me kind of like mushing them together. So this one was pretty massive, pretty big. It's about just 6 kids, 3 guys, 3 girls go out to a farmhouse. They all have childhood traumas. They kind of tell their stories and this and that, but then like some outside forces, straw dog style, start messing with the kids, and it's very extremely violent and extremely disgusting. And I don't know why I ever wrote it, but it's fun nonetheless. I actually gave a copy of this to two of my teachers in high school, so I'm curious as to what they thought. Because really, I took this writing class, introductory to writing or creative writing class, one semester, and we had assigned projects we had to do, but then also we could free write and do other things, and that's where a lot of my poetry came from, was writing in that class. So I took the same class again another semester, and the teacher was like, well, since you've already done all these writing projects, you can do one of two things. You can do all the same projects we did the first time you're in the class again, or work on one big long writing piece. So I elected to pretty much do both. I participated in the same class again, and then at the end of the year turned in Hypothecra. Now, Hypothecra is not great, but it's me trying to take a slightly dramatic step into actual legitimate writing while mixing it in with a horror movie. What's funny about this is this one has a slight offshoot where in one scene, there's so many horror movie references in this movie, it's sick. It's just every scene they're just talking about horror movies, they're referencing horror movies, there's hidden things in the background all referencing horror movies because, this is the time of like Scream and all the horror movies coming out, and people like, Randy and Scream being horror movie fanatics, and that was pretty much me in high school. But there's a scene where the kids in here are driving down the street going into town, and they run into a couple who broke down on the side of the road, and it was a subtle reference to The Crow, the graphic novel, because right around the same exact time, I was adapting The Crow graphic novel, trade paperback technically, into a screenplay. I wanted to do it shot for shot, word for word, exactly like the comic book. Do it in black and white, and only the blood be red. This was 1999, 98, 99, 99. Pretty much 6 years later, Sin City did the exact same thing. Of course, this was never going to happen because obviously it's somebody else's property. And also right around the same time, sort of an offshoot, has nothing to do with my world, but I started adapting a book called The Wanting Seed, which is a book by Anthony Burgess, the guy that wrote Clockwork Orange and a bunch of other great books. Because actually, in this movie, a character is reading that book, and I started adapting that. So that was a good practice at like taking somebody else's words, trying to form and create scenes out of somebody else's work, paring it down and whatnot. So this is kind of the second decade. I'm trying to remember if there's anything else tied to it here. So again, the horror became Hypothecra. Sort of connects to an offshoot of The Crow. Sort of connects offshoot of the Wanting Seed. And also, dumbly enough and crazily enough, one of these, I don't even remember now, might have been Whatever Happened to Charlie Bowles. There's a subtle reference that goes off to sort of connect to, I don't remember. That says Last House on the Left. I was a big fan of the movie Last House on the Left right around this time, and I think I was either writing a sequel or I wanted to just obviously write a remake. So right around this time, I was really big into movies, so I wanted to do my own version of The Crow. I wanted to do my own version of Last House on the Left, and I wanted to do my own version of Dawn of the Dead. I wanted to remake Dawn of the Dead. And then again, what horror movie zombie fanatic doesn't? And of course, 2003, they remade Dawn of the Dead. Or was it 2004? Doesn't matter. So this one I never really did much with. The Crow I never really did much with. Wanting Seed I didn't do much with. But then again, those weren't my work, so who cares? Whatever Happened to Charlie Bowles, never finished. Hotel California, never finished. Rabbit in Red, don't remember how far I got. But so these two are lost to the ages. Some of these other ones exist. These ones here still exist completely. Hypothecra exists completely. Now, these were all done in probably the year 2000. So that's year 2000. Now, while I was still a senior in high school, this is April or May of 2000, I got in trouble a lot. So I was in in-school suspension, so I brought a stack of paper. And I was going to write out ideas for a music video to shoot to the song Shout at the Devil by Motley Crue. Again, this was 2000, but my friends all had like muscle cars, like Cudas and Trans Ams and whatnot. And I had my high video camera that you've probably seen on this channel. And so we wanted to shoot a music video. So I started writing some weird thing. And after a couple minutes, after a couple of pages, or I don't know what, I probably still have the pages somewhere, I kind of abandoned that and started writing a treatment for another story that would eventually become Red Brick Enigma. So I started writing Red Brick Enigma. I wrote out by hand like 8 pages of the treatment, coming up with all the different characters, how they interconnect. Now the loose thing behind it is Red Brick Enigma is a play on the Yellow Brick Road, and each character sort of represents a character from Wizard of Oz. But in this story, there's no names. It's like college boy, teenage girl, woman, and frat buddy, I think, are the 4 main characters. So this one I wrote, I really enjoyed. I was heavily influenced at this point in time by Magnolia, so I started writing very, very big, like long, epic things. Like this is like 120 pages at like 9-point font. Very massive. So Red Brick Enigma I wrote in the course of a couple weeks. I mean, I mapped it out, and I think that summer I ended up writing the whole thing in the course of a couple weeks in the basement. I remember listening to the Marshall Mathers LP. I was listening to Stan on repeat a lot, listening to a lot of Korn, which is weird because neither one of those things really fit into the movie or the style or the genre or the feel of it. The Red Brick Enigma I actually still really enjoy. It's not great. It's trying too hard. It's trying to be too clever, but I kind of liked how big it got and how they all interconnected it was. Now, in Red Brick Enigma, before I really sat down to finish it and really get into it, I was like, well, there's a couple characters in here. I think it was College Boy or maybe it was Teenage Boy. Teenage Boy has a backstory, and his name is Stephen Epic. I know that. I came up with that. So I kind of backtracked real quick and wrote a movie called Crossroads. Not the Ralph Macchio movie, and this was years before the Britney Spears movie. Crossroads because Bone Thugs and Harmony song Crossroads, and then also there's a place near our neighborhoods that my friends and I used to call the Crossroads, where we'd meet up and ride our bikes. So Crossroads. So I kind of wrote. This is like a small, really intimate, just like friends hanging out and talking, kind of similar to like what Squelch kind of was, but more just about like relationships and boyfriend girlfriend stuff and whatever. But still trying too hard. Not great, but I kind of just wrote this on a whim to get a better idea of who the character of Stephen Epic was before I finished writing Red Brick Enigma. Now, also in Red Brick Enigma, there's a girl, teenage girl. I don't know why I'm writing this, but teenage girl pops up, and she meets College Boy. Now, she tells a story about how she was just traveling on the road, Jack Kerouac style, and tells this whole story about how she met this guy. They traveled around, did a bunch of crazy, interesting things, and then they parted ways. And then where that story ends is where she gets picked up in Red Brick Enigma. So she comes from a story that I wrote after Red Brick Enigma. Well, technically, I came up with it this was 2000, and then I came up with this teen girl character and her backstory in 2000, but she ended up popping up into a movie called Broken Angel, Muted Demon, which is a line that I wrote in a poem in 2001 and really liked it. I named like a compilation, a poetry collection, Broken Angel, Muted Demon. I just use that phrase a lot. So Broken Angel, Muted Demon happens. There's 2 characters in it. There's a teenage girl whose name eventually became Cassandra, and a character named Triton. So you have Triton and Cassandra are in Broken Angel, Muted Demon. She leaves that movie and goes into Red Brick Enigma. Triton leaves that movie and goes into a movie called Halsey and 51st. This is my very, very, very much my Magnolia. It's very big, 10 or 11 different characters, a bunch of craziness, a bunch of weird shit that happens that doesn't make any sense. Just very angsty, mean, raw, whatever else. Because I started writing this in September of 2001, like right before 9/11 happened. And then obviously after 9/11 happened, the world got really weird and dark and everybody's mad. So, Halsey and 51st, I started writing 2001, and I think it took me roughly till 2005 to technically finish it. I wrote most of it by hand, still got a lot of those pages lying around. So, Broken Angel, Muted Demon, splits, goes into Red Brick Enigma, goes into Halsey and 51st. Now, concurrently, where Red Brick Enigma ends, the character Stephen Epic, who is in Crossroads and in Red Brick Enigma, he goes on to his own trilogy called 1014, The Epic Saga. Part 1 The Rise. 2, The Rain. Part 3, The Fall. So, Stephen Epic first appears here in Crossroads, goes into Red Brick Enigma, leaves Red Brick Enigma, goes into a trilogy called 1014, The Epic Saga. 1014 is my birthday, and I didn't even think about it. I just liked the name Stephen Epic. I don't know where it came from, it just came from somewhere. And so I called it the Epic Saga. Now, in my high school, we had... I'm trying to remember which one's which. Our yearbook was called the Epic. And our monthly newspaper was called the Saga. Or that's inverted. I don't remember. So it just happened that I used the term the Epic Saga in both those, or our publications from my high school. Now, I wrote treatments for all 3 of these stories. I think I only ever wrote the screenplay for The Rise. This is a weird story. Don't really know what to say about it. It's about a school shooting. You know, this is 2 years after Columbine, but like it's more about media and reaction to that kind of stuff, even and about anti-consumerism and whatever else. Because then again, a lot of us were watching Fight Clubs who were all very like anti-consumerism, anti-capitalism for a while because we were teenagers and idiots. So, and then somewhere along this line, there's another story that I wrote an entire treatment for called, In the Land of Ivory Bullets with Chromium Shells. In the Land of Ivory Bullets with Chromium Shells. That's a treatment I wrote that still exists somewhere. It doesn't really fit in with any of these other things, I don't think, because it's been 25 years since I thought about it. But it might fit in somewhere, but it's kind of like a heist movie, kind of not. I don't know. I was just trying weird things. So, Red Brick Enigma, wrote in 2000. It feeds into what I say. 1014, The Epic Saga, wrote in 2000, 2001-ish. But I only wrote part 1, just wrote the story, the outlines for part 2 and 3. Now, Teen Girl, as I said, came from Broken Age of Muted Demon. And it was in 2002 when I decided that that should be its own movie and I should actually write that. So that's when kind of Triton started coming around. And that's when I realized, because I wrote Red Brick Enigma, told that girl's backstory. Then I wrote Halcyon 51st, and then Triton, who's in that, he tells his backstory about this time period spent on the road meeting this girl. So while I decided in 2001 or 2002 that that's going to be its own movie someday, I ended up not writing it until 2004. If I knew how to do like graphics and stuff, I would do that. So, in 2014, I ended up taking Broken Age of Muted Demon, pretty much paring it down completely, making it smaller, rewriting it completely by hand, and making a different version. That goes on to something else that I completely forgot to talk about. Hypotheca. I liked the premise of that story. So, 3 guys, 3 girls get together, they go to a farmhouse to talk about their childhood traumas, etc., etc. Straw Dogs type stuff happens, horror movie. So I was like, let me try that again without the horror movie elements, without the Straw Dog elements, and just go for some sort of like Goodwill Hunting, people talking about their issues, and just make the turmoil just be people versus people and arguments and working things out. So then there became a Hypotheca 2.0. But for some reason I changed most of the names, started writing like the first scene, and then just kind of abandoned it. And then I kind of reworked the whole thing again to Hypotheca 3.0. And it's Hypotheca 3.0 that now leads into Broken Age of Muted Demon. Because one of the guys who's in Hypotheca, him and his girlfriend have issues while they're there. They break up, have some issues. He takes the car, he takes off, he starts traveling, meets a teenage girl, and this guy is Triton. The funny part is, Triton, since I wrote Halcyon 51st first, is not a good guy in this story. but then I really like him in Broken Angel Meet a Demon. So there's almost no real reason why there's this huge change between why he's this good guy and goes into this piece of crap. Although since then I've came up with an idea in another completely side project tangent of how that could actually work if he's not technically the same guy, but is also kind of not technically the same guy. That makes sense in a weird way. So the version of Broken Angel Meet a Demon written in 2004 and then rewritten in 2014 is actually a sequel based off the third version of Hypothecra that I never wrote. And I never will. Now, the same time that I started writing Broken Angel Meet a Demon, I had 2 weird dreams like 2 nights in a row. And one of them turned into a story called The Horror, reusing that title. I just called this The Horror because it's a horror movie. And I wrote 20 pages of that one morning after not sleeping all night or waking up from weird dreams, started writing. And then almost within the same week, I woke up from a different dream, started writing, and started writing a story called The Dream. Both of these were in 2004. The Horror I ended up writing an entire day sometime in 2005. And it was just a short shot, little thing, not a big deal, small little horror movie, ain't no thing. Except for in 2013 I had an idea. When I was volunteering at the Halloween convention in 2013 in California, I had this crazy idea about writing a book about the convention. And how it's like minute for minute all the goings on, and like, you know, going into this booth and this booth, being a worker and just telling all these little side stories and overhearing conversations and making something of it. But then I thought, like, you know, why make it about Halloween when I can make it about my own horror movie franchise? So that's when I decided that I could take the horror, I could bring it over here, and it became part 3 in a 6-part, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 horror. It became part 3 in a 6-part horror franchise. This one's mapped out, this one's mapped out, 4 and 5 are mapped out, and 6 is kind of where the convention idea goes from. So instead of, again, using Halloween and Halloween characters and Halloween actors and stuff as the references for the story, I might as well just create the entire horror series myself. That way I can craft the characters and stuff to my liking. So that was interesting. So the horror came up with 2004, finished in 2005, and then 2013, 8 years later, became the middle part of a 6-part film series, which I still have yet to write, but I think I could do really well. Because these two, I did, in a sense, model it after Halloween, to where the first 2 parts take place in the same night. Part 3, when you watch it, it doesn't feel connected to the first 2. Kind of like Halloween 3 isn't Michael Myers related. And parts 4 and 5 are connected, even though you don't know how they would connect to part 3. Something like that. Or 4 happens and you don't know how it connects to part 3, but then 5 happens and you realize how it connects to part 3. And then when 6 happens, it pisses everybody off. Right? Now, The Dream was a hard story. It takes place over the course of 4 years, but it jumps back and forth between times. Kind of like The Fountain did in 2006. It takes place in like 1500, 2000, and 2500. It kind of jumps back and forth, kind of interconnects and all that. This does that, but I came up with it in 2004 before The Fountain came out. But I didn't know how to write it, and I could never unlock it. It took me to 2013 to figure out what the issue was. I unlocked it, and then in 2014, I ended up writing the entire thing in 60 hours over the course of like 2 weeks. So it sat in my head for 10 years before coming out in 2014. And then in 2019, I rewrote it as a novel, sort of, called The Dream of Ondala, which I still have copies of. I just took the screenplay and rewrote each scene as sort of prose. It's still very, very thin. I call it the See These Bones edition because it's very minimal. Now, one thing I didn't ever talk about was Halcyon 51st shoots down here, and it has a sequel called Ginger Bridge. Spelled just like that. Capital G, lowercase I, capital N, lowercase g, capital E, R. Bridge. Ginger Bridge is a sequel to Halsey and 51st. It was dreamed up in 2002, and here it is in 2025, and I've never written it. But I still plan to. That's the weird part. But the weird part and the hard part about it all is the version of this I would have written when I was in my early 20s is a lot different than the version I would write in my early 30s. I don't know why I just said early 30s when I'm in my early 40s. But it's still true. The version, if I would have wrote this in my early 30s, would have been a lot different than the one now. So the crazy part is, out of all these, generally, all these took place between 1998 and I would almost say 2004. Right? Squelch, 1998, and the last real idea I ever had for a screenplay was The Dream in 2004. Again, didn't write it to 2014, and the horror I wrote in came up with an 04, wrote in 05, and then just redesigned it, in 2013 to be something else. And the only other thing that connects with any of these is a story called Kismet, which sort of connects in and around some of these. Now, there was a time in 2013-14, before late 2013 going into 2014, before rewriting Broken Angel Muted Demon and before writing The Dream, both of which I completely wrote by hand. I was doing a bunch of little short stories, and or short film screenplays, and a lot of those became ideas that would grow to be utilized over here in this stuff. And Kismet was one that grew out of that as well. Kismet doesn't really fit in with anything else. It kind of sits off on its own. Sort of. Because there is a slight connection by this character who I'll just say her name is Rose, but it's not really her name. But then Rose is a character over here. And then there's this really short screenplay I ended up writing in the course of like a day or two called Dark Word. Dark Word. Broken Angel Muted Demon was originally like a pretty hard R, and when I rewrote it in 2014, I brought it down to PG-13. The Dream I always figured would be like a decent R, but when I wrote it, I brought it down to PG-13. So it's kind of tapering and kind of bringing everything down, making it smaller, making it less, gross and violent and whatever else. But so after doing that for a couple months and trying to write PG-13-ish, I needed to explode. So I wrote this really dark, messed up story called Dark Word. And the character of Rose, who I will say her name is Rose, but it may or may not actually be her name, shows up in that. Rose does. And she's also in Kismet, and then she pops up over here. And then the main girl in this story, Blair, kind of pops up over here as well. It's all sort of interconnected. One last look. I know it's not much to look at and you can't read it. Maybe somebody out there can take my audio and do the graphics for me. I'm not going to waste your time counting it. It started with Squelch, prequel to Steel Time Asphalt Beach, and The Remnant Were Slain, offshoots to Rabbit in Red, offshoots to Hotel California. Started writing Last House on the Left, remake, Crow remake, Wanting Seed book, Whatever Happened to Charlie Bowles, Lost. Tony Watch Your Head's Always Choosing My House, Lost. In the Land of Ivory Bowls with Chromium Shells. Just a Treatment exists. These three exist. Horror turned into Apothecra. Apothecra has 3 different versions. The second one I started writing and never finished. The third one I never even started. But the third one jumps over. Where it ends is where Broken Angel Muted Demon begins. Where Broken Angel Muted Demon ends, one character goes into Red Brick Enigma. The other character goes into Halsey and 51st. One of the characters from Red Brick Enigma goes into a 3-part trilogy called 1014 The Epic Saga. Characters from Halsey and 51st, some of them go down into Ginger Bridge. And actually I want to say characters in one of these, the horror, at one point in time there's a character in here who ended up being in Dream of Vandala. Pretty much just by name, not really connected too much. Or he's just a side character, doesn't have much going on, he just kind of leaves and goes into this story. And so he goes in Ginger Bridge, Kismet, Dark Word. 6-part horror story, or is it 7? Who knows these days? But pretty much all that in the course of 6 years. It's the naivete and the ingenuity of a late teen, early 20 mind. So, if you're ever curious what goes on in a writer's head, this is it. And also, while doing all this, I wrote 27 books of poetry and about a decade's worth of journals. Yeah. Let me know. Any of that interesting? Did you do the same thing? Because I hope you did. Peace.